Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mickey Feldman-Simon. I am the founder of I'm Back at Work, and I'm excited to have you here today. And I hope you will join us on other webinars in the future as well, and join our Facebook group where we can provide you daily tips and advice on your career and your job search. So before we get started, and thank you, Susan, for joining us today, and before she introduces herself, I want to make sure that you know how to use the webinar panel. So your webinar panel now is going to look on your screen. Susan, if you can just move to the next slide, please. Exactly. So your webinar panel will either look like the image on the right or the image on the left, and that's when it's closed up or expanded. And to open and close it, you click on the little orange arrow up the top. That's all you need to do, and it will open and close the panel. And if it's now obstructing the view of the PowerPoint, and if you want to move it out of the way, all you need to do is just click at the top of the panel and drag it out of the way. Okay, now we will also have a 5-minute question and answer session at the end of the webinar. And to ask questions, and if you have a burning question throughout, I will be monitoring your questions. So click on the gray questions bar. It will open up the panel for you, and then just type in your questions in the blue rectangle underneath, and we will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. And now I'm going to turn my video camera off, and I'm excited to have Susan here to talk to you about how to tell a good story that will help you advance your career.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mickey, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to have you here. I want to just briefly tell you a little bit about me. I am a ghostwriter, editor, and author. I focus on helping women tell their stories, and in a couple of different ways. Primarily, I do a lot of work helping women write their books, but I also do thought leadership, and that could take any type of a form, like perhaps a blog or an article for an industry publication, those types of things. So really helping women to use their voice and get their brilliance out into the world. I have a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal, and that is to help 1 million women become authors. And I'm doing it in a number of different ways. I actually do a lot of this kind of thing where I'm teaching women and helping them to understand how they can use their voice in the written word. I also have a book that I've written, 6 Things No One Tells You About Writing a Book. Great book. It's really a fun, quick, easy read to help you understand what it's like to actually dive in and write a book. And I do lots of workshops and different types of speaking. So really trying to inspire women to get their voices out there, especially these days where lots of people are listening. I live in the southern coast of Maine, and I have a couple of dogs. I love running. I have 2 awesome kids. Just a little snippet about me, but I want to dive right in here and talk about you and using your story. So this is probably something, I think stories have become a bit of a buzzword, and hold on, I'm gonna just do that. So stories have become a little bit of a buzzword. We hear a lot about it, storytelling, stories. A lot of people are talking about this, but there's a really good reason. It's because stories are powerful. And why should you use them? Primarily because it helps you to stand out from the crowd. No one else has your story. Only you do, and only you can tell it from your point of view. There's a couple different ways that you can use it. You can use it to introduce yourself to new people. It really helps you to be memorable when you're using a story effectively. Using it in job interviews is really critical, and I know a lot of the folks that that attend these workshops and these webinars are in that place where you're trying to get back into the workforce. At networking events, really powerful in a sales presentation or any other kind of a presentation that you might be doing. Stories are really powerful tools.
Susan, I'm
Yes.
going to just one moment. I'm having one person having difficulties with the sound, and I want to make sure that other people are not as well. So if
Sure.
other people can just send me in the questions, just let me know that you can hear, then I appreciate that. So let's just take one moment to make sure that it's not something happening with other people and they're not mentioning anything. So other people can hear. Okay, so let's continue.
Okay, no problem. So today what I want to walk you through is three steps to getting your stories ready, because a lot of times people will just kind of wing it, kind of tell a story off the top of your head. It's really better to prepare, and I'm going to help you to do that. So the first step is to inventory your stories. Just take a step back and look at, and I call them the three buckets or the three Ps: personal, professional, and passion. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those and what that looks like. The next step is to really understand your audience and what's important to them. If you're going to a networking event, if you're going to an interview, different situations, how do you get to know your audience a little bit so that you're telling stories that really work for you? And then I want to explain story basics. So what does a story look like? What are the different elements to it, and how do you build a good story? And then finally, I'm going to share some bonus tips with you, just things to keep in mind as you're pulling your ideas together and your stories together, and how to use them. Let's dive right in. So step one is inventory. And as I mentioned, there are three different buckets that you want to be thinking about. This is the easiest way to start inventorying your stories and your experiences. So number one is, the first bucket is professional. What I recommend is you start thinking about, what are my real world experiences? As I look over my resume, what are the different things that I've done in my work life? And you really want to key in on things that were challenges for you, and it might be really positive challenges. Maybe you were handed, or you were in charge of a really large project, and you were very successful with that. It might even be some negative challenges. Maybe there were difficult personalities or things like that. It really depends on what you faced. But the thing that you want to be thinking about is, what can I take away from that I could share with someone that I learned? How did that improve and make me a stronger professional? So you want to be thinking about the different experiences you've had as a professional and how I might be able to use that to my advantage. Personal stories are fantastic, again, because they're so memorable and they can be so powerful. Real world experiences that are relatable to your audience. You want to be thinking about, Jesus, this person also maybe a family person, maybe they have children, maybe they're involved in sports, different types of things. It's just a great way to connect with people. Also, sometimes your personal experiences can help you in the work environment. So as you start listing out some of your personal experiences and your personal stories, be thinking about, how might that help you in a work environment? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Perseverance, you might be able to tie that from recovering from an injury or an illness. Or leadership, maybe you're involved in some things with your children. Maybe it's leading a scout pack, a scout group, or something like that. Maybe leading fundraising. That helps to build your leadership skills. And then goal setting. It might be something like the picture here, the woman crossing the finish line. Maybe you've run road races, maybe you've had weight loss, maybe there's some other personal major milestone that you've accomplished that is really important, but it helped you to set goals, and again, maybe tie in perseverance. So you want to be looking at your personal stories and how can they demonstrate the kinds of things that perhaps an employer is looking for. This is really great to use in an employment setting, as the kinds of things, especially if you've taken a break from work and you're trying to get back into the workforce, like I understand many of you are. This is a great way to kind of weave that in, to show that even though you were perhaps away from the professional environment, you're still honing some of those skills that would be useful in a professional environment. And then finally, passion. And this is one of my favorite areas because I think people tend to forget this. I would encourage you to think about what experience has helped you to either discover or develop your passion. If you have a passion for perhaps working with children or maybe animals or the environment, how did you discover that? How did that develop for you? And the why behind it. The thing that's really great about stories around your passion are that it really reveals a genuine part of you. It's something that that you could typically speak from the heart and really showcase your authenticity. Again, you want to be able to link that to the work environment, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Perhaps you're passionate about the environment, children, women's rights, hunger and poverty, perhaps animal rights, that type of thing. Any of those things could potentially be tied to your audience, whether it's an interviewer, maybe it's a company maybe you're applying to a nonprofit and it's a great fit. You definitely want to showcase your experience and your passion around these types of areas of interest. So weaving those things in can be really an important, again, making you memorable and really giving you something different and unique to set you apart from other people that your audience might hear from. Step 2 is all about your audience. And it's understanding what your audience is. And there's actually only one action item for knowing your audience, and that's to do your homework. And there's a number of different ways to do your homework. And you want to think about, if you're going just to a networking event, you might not be able to know the audience all that well. But in other cases where it's a one-on-one situation, if it's a sales situation or perhaps an interview, you definitely want to do your homework and take some time to get to know who it is that you're going to be meeting with. The most important thing is to try and understand what their needs are from their point of view, not necessarily from yours. So, for example, if it's an interview situation and you have a job description that you're working off of, looking at that job description and understanding what's going to be important to the interviewer, the person who you're going to be interviewing with, what's important to them, what do you think that they're going to be needing from that role, and then how could a story of yours demonstrate that you're a perfect fit. You want to craft your story, as I mentioned, to show how you meet that need. So as I mentioned earlier, like with passion or with maybe some of your personal stories of cultivating perseverance or leadership, how can you weave that in to make it look, to make the connection obvious to the person that you're talking to? And then you also want to inspire your audience, your listener, to feel good about you. So you're telling a story where the person might, again, it's a connection point. Perhaps you both have children. Perhaps you both have a love of animals. Perhaps you both have something in common. This is a great way to make a really strong connection with anyone that you're talking to. How do you do homework? Good question. Social media. Social media is a real gift when it comes to wanting to know a little bit more about someone. I strongly recommend LinkedIn. If you are not on LinkedIn, I strongly recommend that you create a profile and learn more about that platform. It's incredibly powerful. It's got a lot of great information out there. Look at other platforms as well, like Facebook and Twitter, because that's where you can get a sense of what are the kinds of articles or what are the kinds of articles a person is sharing, maybe comments that they're making, things that are important to them. This is a great way to learn something a little bit about the person that you're going to be meeting with, so that you can find some common connection points and figure out what story do I have that's going to make the most sense in that setting. If it comes to it, if you're thinking about networking, you're going to make your stories a little bit more general, maybe not quite as specific in terms of knowing exactly what someone is talking about, knowing what someone might be interested in. So the step 3 is story basics, and I want to share with you folks a little bit about what a story consists of and what are the components of a story. And so there's 4. There's structure, there are key elements, authenticity, which I'll touch on, and then connection. And I've already started to kind of talk a little bit about connection, but I want to dig in to make sure that you understand what a good story looks like. So we'll start with structure. Every story has a beginning where we meet the main character and you set the stage. You kind of give a little bit of background. The middle is actually where the journey and the challenge are encountered. That's where you're kind of literally telling the story. And the end is, what was the resolution? Was there a change for you? How did you change as a result? And then is there a call to action? And a call to action is if you want someone to actually take action after listening to your story. And an example of that might be in an interview situation where you're making a connection for them of, here's my story, here's how it fits into what you need, and I'd love to talk about what our next steps are, so that you're really making a strong connection with that person and inspiring them to take action. In a sales situation, same kind of a story where you really want to end a story strong and say, here's what a call to action is for you. I'd love to talk about next steps in our process. So I want to use the Wizard of Oz because it's such a well-known story, but I want to basically give you an example of so that you understand what that looks like. So in the beginning of the Wizard of Oz, we meet Dorothy. We see her as a farm girl, and this big storm comes and kind of changes everything for her. In the middle, it's that whole journey to Oz and the challenge of getting back home. And then the end, she clicks her heels and she discovers her bravery. So this is a really basic layout, but you look at any story, any movie that you enjoy, any book that you enjoy, you're going to see the same kind of structure and the same kind of a story arc, if you will, where it's like, okay, here I'm this average girl, and I end up in a storm, and then I have to find my way home, and I'm scared, but then I figure out actually I'm a pretty brave, and so it's an interesting way to parallel, hopefully, and have you get a sense of what a story looks like from beginning, middle, and end. The elements of a story are pretty basic. We just talked about them. Is a hero, that would be you in your story, a challenge, something that you faced, and then the journey that you went on. So what led up to that challenge? How did you face the challenge? Then on the backside, what's the resolution and how did it change you, impact you for the better? So those are the basic key elements of any story. And as you start inventorying your story, you're going to be able to add and see that same kind of a pattern to any of your stories. The call to action, again, hopefully to inspire somebody to take you to the next step in an interview process, or if you're selling something, that hopefully you're taking them to the next step in the sales process as well. So that's almost an optional piece depending on your story. So don't feel that the call to action is critically important. It's not necessary in every single story, but this is the basic layout. Authenticity. Very, very, very key. Don't embellish your stories at all. Make sure that they are something that are true and real. It helps you to be authentic. It's based purely on your experience. Again, it's going to, excuse me, reveal a genuine part of you. Excuse me. It elicits emotion. So this is one of those things where you might tell a story about, oh, I was, going through, maybe I was training for some kind of a race and I got hurt and, it was, a week away or something like that. And, so you're getting people excited like, ooh, so what happened or what did you do? And you really do want to, kind of tease that out a little bit and get them to be excited and engaged with what it is that you experienced. This is something that is so critical because it helps the audience to connect with you. Emotion is important in terms of making that really strong connection. And that's the fourth part of a basic story, is it causes your audience to relate to the situation where they really understand you. They can really get a sense of who you are. It creates what I call a we are alike link. Excuse me. So what I mean by that is that as humans, we tend to gravitate towards people that are like us. We like to spend time with and be with people who are like us. So as you use your story, you want to create a we are alike link. We both like the same thing. And when you do that, it really creates a strong connection and a strong bond. That connection also helps to motivate them to take action, which I've talked about a couple of times. And this is a quote from a book that I'm going to share with you at the end, but this is in the book, Esther Choi talks about the fact that logic makes people think, but emotion makes people act. And that's a really important point to take home as you think about creating your own stories. So let's talk a bit about bonus tips. Some important things for you to remember. Choose stories that highlight your values and your future plans. So as you think about different, we talked a little bit about passion, about personal. These are things that help to showcase your values as a person and really where you're headed and how you think and how you can plan. And that's a really important thing to be able to talk about in a direct way. If you happen to be interviewing, you probably already know this, but researching the company is an important part of preparing for an interview. But looking at their values, maybe looking at their mission statement and figuring out how can I craft one of my stories to kind of fit and dovetail nicely with what they have to say. This is a company that's down in the Boston area. And this is a quote from their website that from the CEO: "Every employee at Vertex has a deep-rooted passion for improving the lives of patients." I'm sorry, passion for making. Apologize for that. Has a deep-rooted passion for making the lives of patients better. And what's interesting about this quote from the CEO is that he actually uses the word passion. And that's something that I think more and more companies are starting to understand, that that's an important part of business, is that you need to have a passion for what you're doing. It helps you to be a better employee. So just an idea here to give you a sense of what you could be looking for on a company's website that you might be able to dovetail one of your stories in. Address your career gap head on. I know a lot of folks, a lot of the women that are connected with Mickey's program here, you're kind of getting back into the workforce. Don't be afraid of that. I think it's really important to address that head on and to demonstrate your decisiveness and your comfort level and saying, look, I left the workforce for this reason, I'm back, and here's where I'm headed now, and this is what I'm interested in. So being decisive and not being timid at all, and your stories can help you to showcase your decisiveness as well. Another thing, positive only. Avoid any negative comments. Sometimes as you think back over perhaps a professional experience that you had that might have been negative, maybe you had to deal with some difficult people or something like that, make sure that you're talking about that in a positive light and that you're really not making any negative comments. A couple more things to remember and to think about is write it out. I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation is we tend to wing it when we're telling stories. We're just, oh yeah, you might tell a story off the top of your head. I strongly recommend that you write down a story or two that you think you're going to be using in a networking environment or in an interview or in some ways. Write it out first, because what you want to do is practice, and get comfortable telling the story in an effective way, following the making sure that you use all the elements, making sure that you're eliciting emotion, and really want to get comfortable with it. It's going to feel a little awkward at first, but once you practice it and get comfortable with it, it should roll off your tongue very comfortably and very easily. You want to have a couple of stories prepared. Again, a networking event is a little different than a job interview or even a sales presentation. So you might want to have two stories, two different types, maybe a professional one, maybe a personal one, depending on the point that you want to make with that story. Be sure to use humor. Keep it, as always, professional, but people also remember humor as well. And there's lots of books written about using humor in sales presentations and in all different types of situations. Absolutely, use humor, make it fun, and it, again, just helps you to be memorable to the person that you're talking about. This is the book that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This is a great resource. Some of the things that I talked about here are pulled from this book. It's Let the Story Do the Work. Esther Choi does a great job of talking about storytelling in a business setting. So her mantra is how story plus qualifications equals standout success. And that's not just in interviewing, but in a sales environment as well, and in different types of situations within the business world. So she also touches on mastering the key elements of storytelling, which I shared with you earlier, understanding how to research your audience. She's got a lot of great tips in there. Using emotions and connection effectively. And then one of my favorite chapters in the book is she talks about the 5 basic business plots, and that's really interesting. It'll give you some great ideas about how to use a plot and create that beginning, middle, and end that I talked about, and really have it be effective and appropriate for a business setting. So next steps. What are next steps? Create your personal inventory. That's where you want to start. That professional, personal, and passion, those 3 buckets. The next step is to research your audience, use social media, talk to people that you may that you know, reach out to your network and have conversations. That's a good place also to practice. And select a story and apply the story elements, like I mentioned, the beginning, middle, and end. Also make sure you have the hero, the challenge, the resolution, and a call to action if that's appropriate. Write it out. And then, of course, practice, practice, practice. That's a really important part that'll help you to feel very prepared and very polished when it's time to actually tell your story. And
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for all this very valuable information. We have one question already, and while everybody types in their questions, this is your opportunity to ask us to clarify anything or how to apply it, etc. I also want to tell you that Susan put together a handout for you, and if you join our Facebook group, again, just go I'm Back at Work on Facebook, and if you join the group, you can get the handout. I will post it there a little bit later today. So the first question is, Elise is asking, I've prepared stories for interviews in the past, but I haven't found the right time to whip them in. What do you recommend? And I can start answering, Susan, if you want to comment afterwards as well. Elise, so I would think about it the other way. I would think, what questions were you asked? And then for those questions, go back and think, what stories could you tell about them? Because you need to have some sort of a match between the stories that you have and the questions that they're asking you. And often people ask about your strengths, your weaknesses, your achievements. So try and think, if it's about the weaknesses, you think you're not going to have a story about that, but you could actually talk about something that you have improved, because often in an interview, when they ask you about your weaknesses, you want to tell them about something that you've learned to deal with in a better way, etc. So go back, think of the questions, even Google again, most common interview questions, and try and think how for those you can create stories that that you can sort of plunk them in an interview, because you don't really, you can't just bring it in out of the blue. Susan, anything else that you would want to add?
No, I love the reverse engineering idea. It's definitely what I would recommend too, is to go out and, go back and think, okay, what did they ask me? And is there a way that I could weave one of my stories in? How did I answer it? And is there a way that a story would be a better option for me? And I agree, Mickey, going out and just Googling like top interview questions and saying, okay, how can I fit a story in here that really works, that really is going to showcase who I really am, my authentic self, and also what I've learned and what skills I have and what I can bring to the position. So great question.
Right, and there's also a couple of blogs about that on the I'm Back at Work website as well, about interview questions. So at this point, we don't have any other questions. So thank you all for joining us today. And I encourage you to join our other webinars. And thank you again, Susan, for this great presentation. Oh, hold on. One more question I see. Do you have any advice about internships, returning ships after being off work? Okay, so that's not quite to Susan, but sure, there's one. I think Susan did mention LinkedIn, and I would reach out to all different people, companies that you'd be interested in working with, start building relationships, and reach out basically in a similar way that you'd be reaching out to wanting to look for work, but try and look for that possible tryout period, internship. There's also companies that actually specialize in this. One of them is Reach Hire. That's the first one that comes to mind. I think the other one is called Axel Boost. So there's some companies that really work on that. But my attitude is, and what I would coach you to do, is start the same method with building connections, building your network, talk to people, and then start that interaction to start a conversation about a possible position. Anything else? I think that's it. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.